Hey guys, it's Brian Doyle, and this week on MSP Business School, we've got a sales clinic to bring to you. My old boss, actually my first boss, Capobianco, is going to join me, and we're going to really cover a bunch of topics around sales, like effective hiring, essential training approaches, and how to keep your sales team on track. Can't wait for you to join us. Now let's get to this week's MSP Business School. Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. As always, I'm your host, Brian Doyle, and I'm really excited today because I've got a fun guest coming on. Many of you may not know my friend here, Rod Capobianco. He's one of the unsung heroes of the IT industry. But Rod, his biggest thing was he was my first boss. And as such, I've asked him to come on and really come in and talk about the sales and sales management, because that's a topic that comes up often here in our conversations, and definitely want to get Rob's area of expertise into this conversation today. So Rod, thanks for joining, man.
Brian, glad to be on. And you should know, as part of me being your first boss, you were my first hire, if you remember.
I know, and we'll share some more. We'll share some more stories a little bit later. But the first one I'll hit you guys with, listener, is I showed up for my first interview coming out of college, and the guy I was meeting with was getting fired in the conference room as I was walking in the door. So I got to be Rod's first interview. He got to be my first boss. And oh my God, maybe we're either both regretting or happy about that today. We don't know yet.
The rest is history. Yeah,
exactly.
Great memory, Brian. You remember some of those details all too well.
But, with that being said, Rod, I want you first to introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you're doing within the industry today.
Sure. Well, Brian, glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me. Really interested in chatting today. So I've been in the industry of telecom for pretty close to 30-something years now, with WyCap Technologies now, 20-year-old company, coming upon 20 years. And we're an agnostic telecom agent providing different technologies, different services to customers. The difference with WyCap, is that we're sitting on the other side of the desk with customers versus where we might have been before. So we're really helping them understand technology, understanding their business initiatives, directives, and so forth, and helping them find a platform, a service that matches what they're trying to drive towards and what their objectives might be.
Yeah, and that's music to my ears, because these days you really got to get into the strategy of a customer as well, understand what they're trying to accomplish as a business overall before you can really make those technology recommendations. You say telecom agent, but really, the overlap keeps getting narrower between the pure, telecom agent world and the IT service provider sector. And I know you're providing a lot of those services as well. Talk a little bit maybe, how the world of the agent gets involved with IT and how you approach some of those things.
Sure. Telecom is a word that's kind of ingrained in my vocabulary. It's been there for so long that sometimes I just can't get away from it. But really, it's technology as a whole. It's that whole umbrella of the technology stack, the services that we provide. And so, that ranges a whole number of things, and I won't belabor internet, voice, so forth, right up to cybersecurity and services. But when we're an agent, we're able to engage, different suppliers that satisfy different business requirements, different initiatives, and we're able to bring in subject matter experts to support us, whether it's MSPs that are local that have some of these services that we partner with, or it's some of these global suppliers that really satisfy, the bigger initiatives that businesses need. And we're bringing different ones to the talk track with the customer so that we're making sure that as an agent, I said telecom services provider before, but really a technology service provider, we're bringing things that are different, that are satisfying today, as well as 18 months down the road as far as what their requirements might be. And it's changed. The conversations are different. The decision-making is different with these businesses. You have to be prepared. You have to have the firepower to help them find what it is they're totally looking for. And sometimes they don't even know what that is. sometimes it's really unsure, and having that discovery and asking some really challenging questions help them understand some of the things they should be looking at that they hadn't prior to that.
And that's the truth, right? I mean, that's a big part of this, this world is understanding what the customer really needs, because they don't, and helping guide them to that point. And, the reason I asked you to kind of share a little bit about the technology piece, and how the telecom agents have kind of embraced going outsourced for technologies, because we're seeing that movement happening, within the MSP space as a whole as well. More and more customers are outsourcing level 1 help desk, outsourcing their SOC services, for security. And it's because we generally don't have that expertise on staff, especially when we're a young MSP. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's very, again, having come from the agent world before going into the MSP world, I'm seeing a lot of parallels now where groups like yours, who have really kind of attacked the market from a sales first mentality, you've never had that depth of bench that a lot of MSPs had. And as such, you had to go reach out for these experts. And now, as you guys evolve, you start bringing in some of those key areas where you see repeatable services over and over again. Maybe you can speak to a little bit of, what that outsourcing process has been like and why you're comfortable with it. Because many MSPs are a little uncomfortable giving up control.
Yeah, well, I could see it, the whole, it kind of goes back a few years when the shift started to happen with the old traditional telephony world, where the PBXs were in the closet. A technician had to come out and make a repair. Everything was done locally. And we were part of the early stage of this transition, where everything then went to the cloud. So all the components were in the cloud, all the feature set was in the cloud, and all of the service, the remediation, everything was now cloud-centric, but we were still able to bring phones to the desk, whether it was desk phone, soft client on the laptop. So we were kind of involved in all of that, getting it out of the facility kind of thing. So the next phase of that now is the whole IT world started to slowly transition to this whole cloud-based effort as well. And I remember you and I had a conversation some years ago, maybe close to a decade ago, where you said, at some point, really all a user is going to need is either a Chromebook or an iPad or even their smartphone, because everything is going to be somewhere in the cloud. So when we talk about, this whole outside the facility thing and offloading everything, it kind of came natural to us because it started with the phone thing. And listen, there was a learning curve. We really had to wrap our heads around how this evolved. So once we did that, some of the other services that go along with it now that are outside the facility, that to us is kind of like more natural than having it be inside. And I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of a long.
No, it definitely does. I mean, the reality is you guys started from an outside in perspective. So that trust was really born from some of the earlier technologies that you had supported. But then as you started moving to cloud-based, it almost gave you guys the advantage of getting to the cloud a little bit faster than some of the pure play IT service providers were. Obviously we all got that nice accelerant. Well, I guess we shouldn't call it nice because it was really because of COVID, but we got that accelerant where things did get us back out to the MS or to the cloud a little bit faster in the early 2020s. And now it's almost like a foregone conclusion that almost every app you have will be cloud.
There's still some traditionalists though that aren't prepared and don't agree with that concept and want everything in the closet in the back so they could see it, touch it, kiss it goodnight when they leave. So those people still exist, and if it's right for them, that's fine. We're not there to forklift that, but if the conversation evolves to next steps and futurizing what that might look like, well, we're prepared to have a discussion on that.
Cool. So, let's transition a little bit maybe to the world of sales now, right? You've been in sales your entire career. I've been around and, seems like never can get away from sales in my roles, even as the CEO over here. I do at VCIO Toolbox. I'm still primary about building brand and getting out there and closing those larger deals as well. So, as a sales guy, what are you looking for in the salespeople you bring on? Because that is something that IT service providers struggle with, because most of them are tech first owners and they just don't know the characteristics of a good salesperson.
Yeah. It's not easy, and there's no magic pill. So certainly this discussion isn't going to reveal something that's the secret sauce that no one knew beforehand. everybody wants a salesperson that's like themselves. If they're the owner of a company, they want their clone to go out and try to attempt to sell the way that they've sold, that has helped them grow and evolve their company. That's just the way it is. Everybody wants that. But that's not out there, otherwise they'd be running their own company as well. And so in the best attempt to try to emulate themselves, it's tough. A lot of people follow those MBTI tests and the personality tests. And if it checks all the boxes, well, that's a good hire. You got to bring him or her on board. For me, a lot of it is gut. Now, I know that sounds kind of cliche and very kind of loosey-goosey, but there's, a lot of things about people that I look for that if they fall into that category, there's a high probability that we could help them develop into a good salesperson. And they don't need to have sales experience before. If they played sports, we've talked about the athlete, understanding the competitive nature and wins and losses. Well, that plays a lot into what we do in sales, and can that person endure a lot of the rejection and the downside that goes into making 500 calls a week and talking to 3 people, that's always a challenge. Understanding their persona and their family background, what are things like outside of work, and what do they do in their spare time? And can you get a sense if they're conscientious in their discussion and what they bring to your conversation? Those are small things, but you add those all up, they turn into bigger things. And then again, are they engaging? If they go straight to what the compensation is like and how many weeks vacation they get, they're probably not a right fit. But if they're interested in what a day is like and what goes on and how they could play a role in what we do, certainly then they're kind of could be a key contributor. We recently hired a young lady some months ago, and in the conversation we had 5 interviews, and each one of the people in this interview process were all really pretty good, actually. So it wasn't an easy decision to narrow this down. But one of the candidates had a lot of moxie, a lot of like confidence. He carried the conversation well, almost to the point as if, geez, you need me more than I really need you. Again, checked all the other boxes about the athlete and kind of the background and so forth. But a lot of confidence that came out in the conversation that was, that was helpful in determining whether or not they could play a role. We had an interview or a candidate, he's been here 15 years now, but, he came in and really wanted to learn. He didn't have experience or knowledge, but you could tell in the questions he was asking about his interest in wanting to evolve and can he play a role in helping, and certainly has become a huge factor in that. So again, it's gut. And I know that it's, that's a hard thing to really understand, but a lot of times, it, I've had interviews where in the first 2 or 3 minutes, you could really tell like, this is going sideways. I think this is probably going to end here and now. And we've done that too a bunch of times, but
yeah, but let's kind of, stay on one thing I picked up on there, and I definitely agree with you, through some of the hires I've made. Do they ask questions, right? Half of the battle with a salesperson, a good salesperson, is, are they doing a good discovery? Are they bringing back enough information that the team can figure out what the solution is? Do they have the capacity to go dig in there a little bit? And I think when you're doing those interviews, if that salesperson's asking you questions, and you're right, not the PTO and the salary questions, right?
Yeah.
If they're asking questions that are real, like, how do you guys acquire those customers? Have you tried these avenues? Can you, what support can I expect on this? How can I approach this? But if they're asking probing questions to you about the job, and those probing questions make sense, those are a good barometer for understanding, can this person ask probing questions to a customer? Because, when you're sitting across from somebody, especially when you're a young salesperson or a relatively green salesperson, it can be intimidating because those people across the table have those, titles that you aspire to be someday, but are still, up the chart. And it can be a little intimidating sitting in front of a CEO when you're 23 years old and you're just getting to know your job a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if what else you look for in that, but I definitely look for, do they ask questions? And definitely on board with you on the persona piece. If you see a guy that's that is athletic, and these are not absolutes, but or are into some sort of team approach sport, or team, even, in terms of some of the gamers, if you see somebody that has to work in a game that's kind of a team-based game with a goal at the end and they know how to approach that, those are the skills that really get you to your end game, which is, I got to make a sale.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, maybe there's this connection in our kindred spirit because we're both CCSU grads, but one of the things that I've done for 25 years is try to give back to CCSU in any number of ways in their advanced education or career services department. And I'm a student of the co-op program there as well. So for years, we participated in their co-op program and try to hire students that come out of CCSU, both as interns, co-ops, and or graduates. And we used to do a lot of the mock interviews up there. So we would spend a couple of days kind of mentoring some of the students on how to be prepared for what happens when you're in an interview and you're looking for your next step in your career. And I will say that CCSU has always done a pretty good job with their students, but there's always a few that approach you. And we do a lot of the career fairs there too. So this is as recent as 3 months ago. We do a lot of the career fairs there, and some of the students come up to you and they freeze. Like they're not really, and it's not because they can't conduct themselves well, but the moment causes them to kind of like choke up. And so one of the things we have done when we do these things is try to open them up a little bit, try to get them to ask questions. Like tell if you're interviewing someone and they're interviewing you, make sure you have questions prepared. Ask about the role, ask about the expectation, ask about what goes on into the average day, ask what kind of training is like to help you be prepared for what it is like day one in the real world. So, those are some of the things we try to instill. And I do think questions are important because it gives you a cue into kind of what they're thinking and what might come to them as an expectation if they are hired, and what they might do and what their expectation is.
So now, Rod, we've gotten through the interview process. We've made our selection. They're coming on board with us. What do we expect on day one? What should a manager be doing with a new sales rep on day one? We've already gotten coffee and they've already gotten their tchotchkes and they saw where their desk is, but how do you get them really prepared for the job as they're getting started?
That has been an evolution here at Whitecap, and been an evolution in my entire career. The first thing I want to make sure that they feel like they're part of the team. They don't have any knowledge or any experience of what we do. They don't know anybody in the organization, but our goal is to make them feel like they've been here and celebrated their 12-month anniversary. Our goal is to have them become a lifer here. Certainly we want people to come in our organization and adapt to the culture and put that customer first mentality, but also be a performer and help us grow and evolve so that we can continue to expand our footprint, continue to grow our revenue and customer base. So day one, I want them to feel like they're part of the family. And so part of what we've done over the years, and Andrew's been a huge part of this in development with me, is building a curriculum. So when they come in day one, even though we're this small company, we're not huge, with a huge training department and a training lab, have them come in and feel as if they are part of something that's bigger than what we are. So they have an agenda. They have a week one outline. They have a week two outline. They have a week four outline, who they're meeting with, what vendors are going to come in and introduce their wares, what's the training going to be like for sales training, what's their curriculum going to be to learn their composition and practice when they get distractions from a customer, what those responses are going to be. We're going to practice that just like when you go to the driving range and you whack your 9-iron 50 times and then you go to your 7-iron or your 8-iron to your driver. Just like, anything else that you're practicing, you're going to understand what your composition is going to be when you're reaching out to communicate and have a conversation, and then handle what those responses, or what people often call them as objections, might be like. We don't want them to go cold, and we don't want them to feel like they're an island on their own and they're making.
And those are two big things that I see go wrong a lot of times in IT service providers when they hire salespeople. I've gotten to work with quite a few of them. A lot of times these people are on their own island when they're coming into that environment, especially in the MSP world where they're really surrounded by a bunch of engineers and not often with any sales peers, right? So, we have to look at even the most successful salespeople just can't come in and be successful on day one. They need that training program, like you were talking about. They need that outline of expectations. They need the sales, if it's owner-led sales management, they need to have that weekly visit with you once a week minimally, or maybe once a day as you're getting started.
Oh, in the beginning, it's got to be daily for sure.
Yeah, so there you go. So to provide feedback, and it can't get trumped by the technical issues that you might be experiencing in other areas of your business if you want to have success with a sales rep. I love that concept of having weekly outlines for these people too, because just because they know how to sell doesn't mean they know how to be structured. Sometimes they need to be reined in a little bit. Salespeople tend to be a little fast moving and can overlook simple steps that will make them successful if we don't kind of put a fence around it.
Yeah, and to that point, it's not easy, right? You have a business owner that's trying to run his company, trying to take care of all of the minutia that goes on every single day: customer sale, customer issue, customer order, customer deployment, maybe even equipment failure, personnel issue, who's out sick. All of those things play a huge role. And then so you're supposed to find time somewhere in that week to build a curriculum. It's not easy. It's time consuming. Certainly, if you don't have the experience in doing it, it makes it that much harder. But trying to build it before you have the hire, so that when they come in, you're not reactive, you're proactive. That's what we did some months ago, years ago, is build the curriculum. We've modified it more recently. We're continuing to modify it so that we have, when someone comes in, they get their playbook day one. The only thing that changes is the agenda on the schedule as to who's doing what training for those first 60 days. And then, after that, we cut them loose and let them kind of cut their teeth on their own and come back to us with their challenges.
So, Rod, all of us have had good hires and bad hires, right? That's part of the game, unfortunately, and doing that. But how do you know when to continue working with somebody and when to just cut bait? What are some of the indicators that you see there? Because another problem I see a lot in the MSP world is they don't give enough runway to their salespeople to get the job done. And I think most of us recognize most sales cycles, and I'd love to hear how it is for you, but realistically, an MSP sales cycle could be 3 to 6 months. You got to give your guys some runway. What have you experienced?
What I've experienced, or what I might share, is not for everybody, and it certainly doesn't work for a lot of different companies. And it has a lot to do with your tolerance to lack of production, as well as your tolerance to the financial implication of spending this money on said resource and not getting return on the investment. Everybody's different. And so what I might say is a lot of it's gut. Again, it's gut. If someone's working really hard and grinding and they're not having the success that they should, or that you're expecting them to have, but they're in the game, it's just not turning their way. Someone like that might get a little bit longer of a leash than someone who's not making the calls, who's not executing based on the training that you've provided, has kind of thrown in the towel. That's a quick exit. That you pull the ripcord really fast. But if there's some grit, if there's some tenacity, that you got to give a little credit to, and you got to take that as the business owner on the chin a little bit. But you'll know. I mean, it starts to come to the point where you figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of sales reps out there that put in the activity and show that they've got that kind of tenacity to continue doing it even when things aren't turning their way.
Right.
And you see that consistency on what's going on there. And to me, that's always been the people you got to invest into, because the close can be hard sometimes. The close can also be out of their control from a timing and perspective kind of thing. They might have great sales calls with somebody, but they're starting the process 5 months before the actual due date, the contract end date. They want to get in front of it, so they've initiated it earlier, and as a result, we have to wait for those natural, cutovers. Also, some people have to be taught how to close, right? You can have 100 guys that have those meetings that, I've had my 6th meeting with the guy. Okay, at what point did you say, hey, let's put the pen on the paper? What do we got to do to end this today? Love coming out here. Would love to come out here with you as a customer, not as a prospect, that kind of thing. And
if
that comes with time too.
Sure. If you see that stick-to-itiveness that some salespeople lack, but someone has, and they're still not getting to that point, you can forgive those sins a little bit. It becomes a financial issue down the line. But, I've always said if someone's working hard and stuff hasn't turned their way, I tend to turn the eye a little bit more just in hopes that luck starts to come their way. But everybody's different, but I found myself kind of like, I'll know when I know.
Yeah.
But I will say over the years, I have taken a much stricter approach to hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah. And again, I think that approach comes out just in activity. I mean, if you've got somebody that can't show you activity inside of a month, picking up the phone, making some contacts, having an understanding of what's happening in those contacts business, yeah, you got to cut them, right?
Yeah.
Because that means foundationally you've talked to them about it along the way. It's not like it's a shock. But, there are those people that, it's not that the ball's not bouncing, it's just the pipeline's full, but the timing's not right for some of those closes. And they may have lost a couple because they didn't have the full skills to close, but, with a little bit more coaching, they can turn the corner.
Yeah.
And that's where you got to put an investment. I go back to, we'll go into a couple of the war stories here, but I go back to our old VP of sales when we were together, Jack Behar. And one of the things that he brought up to me, he came up to me, and for your listeners, my first job was selling, really my first job was for the first month, selling nothing but 800 numbers. And I was given the phone book and was told, call everybody with an 800 number. Ask them if it's with, at the time it was S&E, now AT&T. If it is, do you want it? Or if it is, great. I hope the service is working well. If it isn't, do you want it to be? And that was basically the pitch, right? Yeah. But Jack came up to me one day because I was struggling a little bit early on. And he said, well, how many calls do you need to make usually to get a lead? And how many leads do you need to make a sale? And, listener, take this as the spirit was meant. You see, Rod's head in my head. This goes back a little ways. So the call numbers have definitely changed. But it used to be, well, I got to make about 30 calls to get an appointment. And I got to make about 3 appointments to get a sale. So he was like, so, Jack looked at me and said, so really, you're telling me it makes you 100 calls to make $300. I go, yeah. He goes, great. So every call you make that you get a no is worth $3.
Yeah.
He goes, if that was me, I'd be on the phone trying to make 200 calls every day.
Jack Behar, he was big data, as we call it today, before big data was a thing. He was, the analytical guy. How many calls did you make? How many no's did you get? What were your average length of time on the phone? We had this wonky software that we used to have to put in with the disk to get him our forecast. But, much like you, we owe a lot to Jack in the way of what we learned to get us to this point and how to really grind. He was a tough guy from the Bronx, and he always talked stories about how World Trade was his territory. And he had I don't know how many floors in there, and he was wearing shoes out every few weeks. That's how we cut our teeth.
Yeah.
And he was huge in us getting to understand what needed to happen. And he had a great way about fueling and motivating us and breaking us down, but bringing us back up too.
He was great at, you can tell that World Trade Center story there. And he was great at reminding us, he goes, you think it's tough? You got a bad territory? I had the first 20 floors of one tower. You guys got the whole state of Connecticut.
Right.
You got no problem. Don't tell me you can't make quota. I'd make quota 10 times over with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, there's certainly some truth to, it is difficult when you figure out how to make it work with whatever your parameters are, whatever your quotas are, whatever your sales, whatever your sales territory is. If you believe in you and you can get out there and do it, you got to make it happen with what you got.
Sure. And I, if we're going back in time a little bit, Brian, I don't know if Tim Kennedy was there when we were working together, but you had Jack Behar, who was hard knocks, and you had Timmy, who was the nurturer and the supporter. Both of those two guys as mentors, and I guess I'll even put Tom Moyes in there because he was huge and just inspiring and driving towards sensible sales stuff. It was great. I mean, I wouldn't have changed any of that beginning for anything.
Yep, and listeners, because you'll get tired of our sales stories, but I'll close with the big one. We came from an environment where everybody was Friday's hero, Monday's zero.
Weekly quota.
Weekly quotas. Now imagine that if that lived in your world. Every Friday, you if you hit quota, you were a hero. Monday, you were back to zero.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of cool negotiations that went behind the scenes if somebody was a little light on quota and somebody else had a little extra something in their bag. that they were
That was
holding
more
out
you
till
guys.
next week.
I was tracking the total. You guys did all the negotiating.
Yeah, but there was a lot of good stuff going on there. Rod, any closing thoughts before we wrap up for today?
Brian, I'll say this, sales has changed a lot over the years. And I would say that in the past 12, 18 months, it might have even changed a lot within that amount of time. And you got to grind, you got to be making the calls. You got to be putting in the time. You got to be driving for conversations to understand what these customers are looking for and what they need. Because if you take that old school sales approach, where it's about you and not about them, you're going to find yourself behind the 8 ball. But if you kind of reposition that and it's about the customer and their business and their team and some of the challenges they're facing or ways in which you might be able to help them get further along, you're going to find yourself having more healthier conversations that might lead to more fruitful sales over time.
And let's also say, listener, my 2 cents on that too. When we refer to calls, we're talking about all the touch points, because a big part of being a salesperson today is being visible across many channels, email, phone, and phone is not dead, but the email, phone, LinkedIn, all the places where your customers hang out, networking. You really got to spread your wings to get this done today.
Yeah, we didn't touch base on that much, but it is multi-channel. It's multi-touch approach all the time.
6 months from now, we can give the next master class. You know what I mean? But with that being said, Rod, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you? I'm going to put your website up on the page as well for those that are watching on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. WyCapTech.com has everything about WyCap, our services, our products, some of the suppliers that we represent. If anybody needs anything or wants to talk further, feel free to give us a call or drop us an email. We'd love to chat further.
And certainly, those of you in the MSP community that are not doing telecom, this is, Rod would be a great resource for you as well. They're non-competitive when they're in arrangements with their clients. So, if you're looking for somebody to work with on telecom opportunities, certainly reach out to WyCap Tech.
Brian, good segue. Before you leave that, I thank you for mentioning that. We do have a partner program that can be discussed with different MSPs that don't have access to these kinds of technologies or suppliers that we could talk about.
Awesome. So we'll be putting Rod's LinkedIn profile in our show notes today. So, as everybody knows that's listening, you can get this podcast anywhere that you can download your podcast, or you can see it up on YouTube at youtube.com at MSP Business School. But more importantly, reach out to Rod if you want to further the discussion, and we'll have his website up there. We'll have his LinkedIn address up there. Rod, I really enjoyed having you on today. I know we've been talking about this for a while. You did awesome.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be on. You made it easy, man. And it's always great speaking with you. You know that.
And we'll look to have you back on again in the future. Thanks, bud.
I hope so. Look forward to it.
Take care.
Have a good day.